Firstly, I'd like to introduce our in-house experts.
Hi, I'm Tom Newton, VP for External Affairs for Korea, and I work with a variety of organisations outside of our business to promote student safety.
Hi, I'm Gabi Walshaw. I'm VP of Product for Early Detection and Intervention. That means I look after both our product and our moderation team for Monitor. And I work with quite a lot of Tom's contacts in our external affairs team, but also with our schools directly to understand what they need in their alerts, what's trending, what's changing, and how we're making sure we protect children across all of our regions.
Hi, my name's Kat Howard. I'm Head of Education and Wellbeing here at Smoothwall, and my role here is to work with multi-academy trusts, local authorities, schools and colleges all over the UK, specifically in the area of empowering students, parents, governors, designated safeguarding leads with this area of digital safeguarding and wellbeing.
And I'm Ben McGrath. I'm Head of Monitor here at Smoothwall, and I'm here today to take our in-house experts through all the KCSIE changes for 2026 and see how they'll impact you as DSLs and school leaders, and what we can do to support you over the coming academic year. Why is this version of the Keeping Children Safe in Education guidance mostly significant? What's important about this? What are the changes? What is going to be the implications for DSLs, school leaders and MATs when it comes to these changes? And why are we so concerned about it?
There's quite a lot of digital areas of technology that have been added into keeping children safe in education. Obviously a bigger focus around AI and deepfakes, obviously aligning the keeping children safe in education better with the tech standards and the changes that we've seen there as well. So those are some of the changes as well, aren't they, this year?
Yeah, and we never get a Keeping Children Safe in Education update without that extending the DSL's remit a little further. This time particularly that suicide awareness, that requirement to be really clear on that, and also things around being more precise around weapons carrying into schools. I think that the requirement for all staff to read Part 1 recognises that the DSL can't take on this additional remit alone, and we do have to make sure that everybody in the school understands that safeguarding is their responsibility. It's not purely something that the DSLs have to adapt to over the summer.
Yeah, Tom, I think you'd expect me to bang on about something to do with technology because that's usually my sort of area, isn't it?
That's why you're here.
But actually, in fairness, I think one of the biggest changes is the emphasis on reviewing your monitoring and filtering provision. And I think one of the places that really makes a difference is how IT and DSLs and the rest of the stakeholder groups in the schools are going to have to work together more closely to ensure that filtering and monitoring is up to scratch. Because you can't make that decision unilaterally anymore. You can't say this is all only IT's job. You've got to go around and talk to other people in the school to find out whether this is working. That's the key thing about the review: is it working? Have you spoken to other people about this? It's not entirely a sort of technical job, if you will.
We'll unpick that a little bit more later on, because I know that there's 6 or 7 different specific areas with this that we're going to explore. And having in-house experts like yourself here at Smoothwall makes our jobs, me as a practitioner, working as part of Smoothwall and the big family that we are, but also working in schools and MATs as well. Having the understanding and being able to articulate that, not just from a technological perspective, but also from the education and from the monitoring and early intervention side as well. What we'll do is we'll explore this as we go through the conversation. But I go back to the question I asked right at the beginning there. We're calling this a significant change. Is it significant? Is it just a change of words that have happened within the Keeping Children Safe in Education guidance, or is there going to be meaningful impact with what's happening?
It's always significant. It's always meaningful. The DFE don't push out these updates lightly. There's a lot of consultation that ourselves and schools around the country are involved in. So it's always a meaningful update. Sometimes the challenge is to carve out what that meaning means for individual practitioners. I think that's always a tricky one. There's always a lot. Pulling out those changes, understanding the impact of them is pretty tough. Something that I suppose we hope to do a little bit today. But yeah, it's always a meaningful update. I don't think we've ever had a KCSIE update where we've thought, well, that's kind of a no-op. That's done nothing. It's
And I think that translates into safeguarding never sits still. It's always moving. It's always changing, always developing, and we always need to keep ourselves on our toes when it comes to actually implementing those changes with all stakeholders, parents, governors, staff, students. It doesn't just sit with one person within a community. That whole section around whole school approach is so important, that all of these things are embedded into the culture of a school and college that we work with.
Definitely. I think evolution is a really important
Absolutely.
aspect of this, because if it stays stagnant and stays in one place, technology and young people are going to move. And I think it's something that I picked up recently with you, Gabi, in a conversation, that it's not just the focus on young people and the technology, it's also the workforce.
Yes.
And that's super important as well. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what this significant change will mean to the workforce within schools?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the key examples is around AI and deepfakes and unification. One thing we've seen is a real disconnect for our schools in terms of an understanding that this is a threat, it's a risk, and it's a risk not only to the students, but we're also seeing it posing a risk to teachers, where deepfakes are being created of them, things that could be, could affect the continuity of their careers, their ability to go back into a classroom and teach. And I think empowering them to recognise that these deepfakes and things like unification are a safeguarding risk. They're an active threat to the well-being of both students and staff. Also gives schools the remit to really lock that down and to really take ownership of their filtering and their monitoring, and to make sure that access to some of the worst sites that enable this kind of behaviour is limited, because it presents a direct threat to children.
Definitely. Kat, from your perspective as being in the coalface of it, working with those educators, working with MAT leaders, do you feel that the staff, the workforce are equipped or educated enough to understand what Gabi's talking about, what AI is, what deepfakes are, what they actually mean as implications to impacting young people?
Yeah, I think at the moment we're in a very different position with every single organisation that I speak to. They're all on a very different journey with that. Some of them are looking very detailed into resources that have been provided by the DFE, like the AI in education, like the biggest risk is doing nothing, which is that early kind of stakeholders who have already kind of gone through that process. But I think every single school and college, multi-academy trust that I speak to, are on a very, very different journey. Some are embedding that into how it works with students and providing school skills with those stakeholders around things like ethics and how they're actually utilising the tools from a positive perspective, but then maybe missing out on areas like what are the safeguarding risks that come out from some of these things, as Gabi said. So I think that's where all of this has to work. I always use the term getting your ducks in a row. They have to make sure they've got their ducks in a row with all of these elements, including the filtering and monitoring, to make sure that they underline that decision-making process that they've gone through.
Definitely. And I'm going to throw a quick question to you around this, Tom, and it's very broad. How fast is the technology developing in order to create aspects like deepfakes and AI and technology to create other areas which are causing concerns with young people because they don't know what's real and what's unreal? And are we moving quick enough with it, or are we moving at the speed that we need to be?
I think it's a very good question, Ben, and it comes back to Kat talking about having our ducks in a row. It's really hard for us or educators or anyone in this sphere to have our ducks in a row, quite simply because the technology companies that build these things have only just started to observe the ducks, never mind line them up neatly. These guys are still in those early phases. The guardrails that we see on AI systems are presently really brittle. I watched a talk only last week on use of AI to anonymize posters on social media. So someone's got an anonymous account, using just a few bits of information about them, you can use an LLM to go and find their real identity for $4, roughly. That's what they were saying it was going to cost in terms of tokens. And that's kind of yet another new thing that we didn't realize LLMs would be really good at, that could pose a problem in society. And being able to make nudified pictures of someone, being able to create deep fakes was something that AIs became good at pretty quickly. That's evolved very rapidly, and putting the guardrails on that has proved difficult because of the generic and general way these things work. It's really hard to put guardrails on. Like, it's a tool to do anything. You can go in there and ask it for a recipe for tonight's dinner. You can go in there and ask it to write some code. You can go in there and ask it for a picture of a fox in a bin. Whatever you want to do, it's going to answer those things, and it's going to give you an answer. That general nature of it makes it incredibly hard to put guardrails on. So it is still a nascent field, is making these things safe. And I don't wish to say like nobody should use them or they shouldn't be used in schools, but we need to understand that the safety of these things is limited. The people who are making them and know them most deeply are struggling with it. We're absolutely fantastically blessed to have the DFE taking that interest and putting out some useful guidance. But we're also going to need to use our intelligence. We're going to need to use our common sense, for want of a better word, to make this work. It's going to be really tough. We aren't moving fast enough, but we can't move fast enough because the information we need necessarily
and
isn't
that's
out
why
there.
it's not a one-hit wonder. It's not, oh, you've got everything sorted, okay, great, we can leave it now. It is something that has to evolve as the technologies evolve as well.
So have we, one of the questions, because KCSIE has put out considerably greater volume of the word deepfake, nudify, creating the difference between real and unreal. Are we moving at the right speed in terms of where young people are moving at their speed? Because we have to address the fact that they are digitally native. They're the ones that have it at the touch of the button. Tom, you've just explained, how quick and easy it is to de-anonymize someone. Someone like myself would find that very difficult to do. A 12-year-old probably has that at the touch of a button. Is KCSIE moving in the speed that it needs to help schools? Because I think one of the concerns we would have is if it fits either side, if it's too slow or too fast, we're not going to be able to keep up. And how do we get that through then to our wider staff in schools?
Yeah, it has to be part of that whole school approach. It has to be, how are we empowering not just stuff that happens within our estate, within our control, within our environments, but also what are we doing out of the wider community? Because as you say, when they're in school, they're having those aspects of filtering and monitoring in place. But when they're going outside of that, how does that affect them? Because they maybe don't have that support network in place. So, tools like parental controls, Custodio, information, advice and guidance out to parents on a more regular basis is something that schools need to be really thinking about, not just having it as I've sorted it in this. And most of the schools and establishments I work with are very, very proactive at sharing information, advice and guidance with families.
Brilliant. We'll get into more about the early prevention a little later on, Gabi, when we're talking about the wider impact of data and information and how schools can digest that and use it positively. But I think just to kind of round off this kind of, has KCSIE done what it needs to do? Gabi, in your kind of one or two sentences, do you feel it's where it needs to be, or whether it's over-egged itself, or whether
I would still like to see the requirement growing for, like Kat says, that whole school approach. A lot of what I'm concerned about is whether these messages are making it out into places like RSE lessons, PSHE conversations. Are we creating the protective factors that children really understand consent when it comes to generating images, creating images, sharing them? Where we're seeing this, the prevalence of AI imagery, most often it's being used to humiliate or to expose, or just through age-appropriate exploration that doesn't have the right amount of friction. Those young people getting to things that they shouldn't be able to get to. And the biggest thing we can give children is an understanding of consent and respect for each other's bodies. And I still don't think we're seeing enough of that to the degree that we need to see to make sure that children can protect themselves and each other.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to move on now, just onto another aspect, and we've covered it slightly in the conversation already, but I think it's where people want to know. It's the interesting part. It's the part that affects us. It's the part that affects young people and the communities around us. It's that new online landscape. It's the AI. It's that infrastructure around it. It's the ability to access it. Paragraph 158, and that's me talking about something that I can see on the screen, so don't worry about that. I haven't memorized it all, but paragraph 158 does talk about... Kat has, yeah, it definitely has. But understanding online harm, such as sharing images and the prevalence of deepfakes, is a key aspect of what KCSIE's looking at. Do schools feel that they've got the tools to help their staff understand what that means? And it's kind of not going back to a question that we've already answered. It's talking about whether reading all of section 1 of Keeping Children Safe in September, is that good enough? Are there any additions to KCSIE this year that have actually gone a step beyond that, Kat?
I think what they need to do is, yes, absolutely, it's imperative that all staff understand their safeguarding obligations by reading that section 1. But what is important is that it's not just, right, we've done that now, they've read section 1, that they check the understanding of that. And there are tools, that are little quizzes and activities that can be done in sessions through speaking to staff members to actually guarantee as best as we possibly can do, that they do understand those, and that as things are changing so quickly, that we're not just reliant on that session at the beginning of September, that we are continuously ensuring that staff are feeling confident with having these conversations in our HE lessons, because that, again, if they're tools that aren't being used because they're not necessarily a user of things like AI, or they've not been exposed to those sorts of technology, how can they deliver lessons to empower young people to have those conversations, to talk about the things that we've been talking about, if they don't use it themselves? And that's where that skills audit of staff members, do staff have the skills to be able to deliver this high quality learning and teaching that needs to be taught on these aspects of digital safeguarding?
Yeah. From an early detection and intervention aspect of it, do you feel that schools are equipping their staff with enough knowledge and education around what they receive from something like Smoothwall Monitor? When they receive it, do they know what it actually means when they get an alert? Or do you think that it's something that needs to be, again, evolved?
We see quite a lot of variation, so it will often depend on how strong their digital safeguarding culture is. Sometimes when we speak to a school, and if we're speaking to them, that's generally really high urgency. We're on the phone because we've got a life-threatening situation. Sometimes they know exactly what we're sending, they understand the context around it, they can talk to the messaging we're giving them and all of the other things they know, particularly signals from their filter as well as their monitor, and they can put that together to create a picture and intervene for that child. What we do see increasingly is a lack of understanding about where the different systems overlap and where they don't, and where you need both in place. So sometimes they will be surprised that, for example, digital monitoring doesn't capture things like malign computer access, which is just very hard to track through digital monitoring because we're all some form of keystroke or OCR monitors. You need really good filtering in place for that. And I think a more grounded observation of that, understanding of how you use that to protect your children, can really help when you do have to act in the moment, when you've got something really urgent, to really make sure you understand the context of that alert.
Yeah. Tom, from a I keep on saying technological aspect, from your expertise, and the forums and the groups that you're in, do you find that the awareness of what things like deepfakes and AI imagery and CSAM through AI, do people understand the impact of that when you're talking to them, and how dangerous it is, rather than it just being real life? Or do you find that we're still burying our heads a little bit in about what the capabilities of AI, especially around CSAM, are?
Again, I think a little from column A and a little from column B. You do see some people who are particularly proactive. I think you see folks also who are burying their heads in the sand. It's a natural response to something that's changed so rapidly. When you bring up CSAM there, for example, the IETF have seen triple-digit percentage increases in CSAM that's generated by AI, which is thankfully under UK laws just as illegal as that which is not. So must be treated with the same care and the same attempts to avoid to bring that into our network. So we've got to consider whether that something can be created with AI, which is terrifying, really, because we've brought a tool into being that can create something that would otherwise be much more difficult for people to access, and a tool which can easily take people down bad pathways, because AIs are quite sycophantic. AIs will do what you want and encourage what you want. So they're dangerous tools. And again, I think the understanding of them is pretty limited. I'd probably say, if you think you've got a good handle on it, dig a bit deeper, because I don't think I've got a good handle on it, and I spend most of my days thinking about it, and the folks in schools can't afford to spend all day thinking about it the way maybe we can. So if you think you've got a good handle on it, you're probably in that, and I'm not meaning this in a mean way, but in that blissful ignorance stage. Like, this is a hard subject, as I said earlier, with lots of different potential harms lurking within AI, within the way it responds to young people, the way it can amplify bad ideas. The sort of garbage in, garbage out. It's more like tiny piece of garbage in, huge amount of garbage out, because those bad ideas can be amplified, those dark pathways can be amplified, and the controls are still really, really nascent. So if you feel you've got a great handle on it, look again, go around again, talk to others about their concerns. This really is going to have to be a group project because we can't do this on our own. Technologists can't manage this on our own. It's not IT's problem to solve entirely. DSLs can't manage it on their own. They need the help from teaching and learning. Everybody needs to be involved, and right up to SLT need to really know what they don't know. That's the important thing here. Know what you don't know.
Yeah, that's a key aspect of it all. And you talked about the groups talking together, individuals talking as groups. And every school, every MAT needs to have AI ambassadors. And we talk about them and we talk extensively to them during the course of the academic year and about what they're doing and how they're doing it. The caveat around all of this, and we're talking some of the concerns around it, but there is the flip side of it as well, where there's AI for good. AI for education is phenomenal. We've seen platforms, we've seen pieces of work. It's a phenomenal tool when used correctly. But what we're seeing in isolation, and something maybe we can push out wider to networks and groups, is those AI ambassadors often feel isolated, and they become the font of knowledge within an environment where they don't have all of the tools and the skills and the education around it to be able to confidently or positively give the answers to everything. I think one of the takeaways for me from this is to talk more with those AI ambassadors and find out where they are and what tools they need to help them deliver what they want to, which is the best support unit possible for their workforce, for their staff, so they can support the young people as much as possible. And I really do think those AI ambassadors are key in the schools and will become more key, not just for the concerns and the dangerous safeguarding areas, but also for the positive work that goes on. And I look to see that. I sit in some primary schools and secondary schools, and they're using AI to turn a piece of literature into an image, so that young people can actually then get the scaffolding around it to understand how that piece of literature looks, so they can relate that then to how they answer a question. And that's superb. It's just that we need to have that balance, that when they go on something, they know of those dangers as well. So it's a really big...
There's an interesting parallel to what you've said there. If you cast your mind back to when GDPR first crept onto these shores, and you found that there was a lot of organisations would have a kind of GDPR captain or whatever, someone who was the font of all knowledge, and they soon became overwhelmed. And it was the people who treated this as a team sport who won, and it wasn't just about compliance, it's also about doing the right thing. And some parallels to that echo that if you just have one person who you treat as kind of the font of all knowledge, like, A, that's really unfair to them, and B, you aren't going to succeed in the same way as people who play it as a team sport.
Definitely. But not only that, when that person leaves or moves on, you've then got a great gaping hole because that knowledge base is then left.
Which they will, because they'll be sick to death of it after about 20 minutes.
The other thing I would say is also that sharing and working with other people who have that area of expertise. So you're not isolated, you are learning, because sometimes I think we can very much sit in silos. So meeting with other practitioners in your local area, working with, if you're a primary, working with a feeder high school. If you're part of a MAT, great, you've got all that kind of networking already built in. But that's something that we also need to champion is sharing knowledge across various different demographics.
Definitely. And I think KCSIE kind of puts that into a perspective. It talks about making sure that you've got the tools and you're finding the right people to talk to get those tools and obtain them. So yeah, definitely. I'm going to move on to the lovely topic of misogyny and misandry as well. It follows slightly the theme of where we're going in terms of where young people are what they're accessing, where they're accessing it, and what they're doing with it. But misogyny is nearly quadrupled in the last year in terms of incidences that we've been identifying. How do you find schools are dealing with that, and how do you find that KCSIE has attacked that, if you like? Because I think that's the only way to talk about it. It needs to be attacked there. It needs to be a full frontal attack on this. Do you think that there's enough within KCSIE to confidently mean that they're going to give the time it deserves to tackle misogyny?
From the schools that I've worked with, they already are looking at this intently because of the volume of incidences that they are having and picking up concerning language being used in classrooms or accessed via an incidences being picked up by filter and monitor. So I know an awful lot of work is going into working with students, delivering sessions, discussing these topics in sessions, assemblies, through the RSE curriculum, but then also empowering and having conversations with families and actually having those conversations, empowering them as parents to have conversations with their children, because again, it may be that this is access that's happening not in the school environment, it's not being picked up there, it's actually happening outside and then being brought into the classroom through conversations that then members of staff are overhearing. So I think it's great that it's increased, because we've had lots of things over the last 12, 18 months that have raised the profile of this issue and concern. And I think it's only right that these are highlighted as higher risk concerns that we need to address.
Definitely. Gabi, from an intervention and detection aspect, is it something, I'm talking numbers here, the human moderators that see this, have they seen a significant increase? Is it one particular vein of or pattern of concern, or is it across the board?
It is across the board, because it so underlies other routes that we see. So, for example, some of the extremism that we see starts on an incel or a right-wing misogyny pathway. Similarly, some of the AI CSAM and sexual abuse that we see also comes down a similar pathway. I think what we've seen from a moderation perspective is an incredibly successful rebrand. The existing very dangerous incel culture was very high risk, but people outside that community didn't look in and want to be them. We didn't see young men who were relatively successful and had friends wanting to ape those behaviours because being an incel wasn't something appealing. Whereas what you see with this looks-maxing culture and this bone smashing and all of the kind of rating each other's looks and wanting to be more perfect and symmetrical, is that's much more appealing for vulnerable young men. We're seeing young men who otherwise are well-liked in their community, well socialised, adapted, have friends, have a situation that feels quite healthy and balanced, still see the appeal of that, because it presents to them that you can be better, you can be more masculine, you can be more appealing. And that then lures them into a pathway that is just as dangerous as the original incel culture, but is vastly more appealing. So we're having to change the language that we look for, that we moderate very significantly, and be much more aware of the nuance. It's a much subtler pathway, I think, into that level of extremism.
That's really interesting, because we think of it as just one column.
Yeah.
But there's a whole spectrum of where it starts and where it potentially never ends. I mean, you look at looks maxing, and up to a certain point, it's a very healthy way to live, isn't it? It's about presenting yourself in the way that you want to be, looking after your body, putting in the right things, not putting in the wrong things. But there's a very fine line, and I guess the moderation team have got that expertise behind them to understand that in context, where that is as an early detection implement, or whether it's at that red and blue flashing light environment.
Yeah, exactly that. I think we've all hoped that particularly teenage boys would find role models who encourage them to wash and eat well and exercise. That's a great thing for us to be pushing out to our young men. But unfortunately, like you say, the line between that and extreme dieting, body changes, illegal or under-the-counter supplementation are all such high risk, and they are so subtly introduced through all the social media messaging and these very idealistic role models, that actually, we have to be very sensitive to where that line exists.
Not just to throw it out to anyone, not mentioning any specifics as in identifying them as being the one, but in terms of social media platforms, are there any that lean more heavily towards that aspect of misogyny and looks maxing, or is it across the board when it comes to different?
I don't think you can blame platforms for this necessarily, that all the platforms contain these sorts of problems. And the reason for this, the reason we're seeing the same show played with a different ticket, as Gabi rightly points out, is because this sells. It's all about making money at the heart of it. The heart of it, there is a flywheel that churns out this content, and people aren't churning out this content because they necessarily believe it. There are creators out there who are harming themselves, and they know they're harming themselves in order to sell content. It's a job. Yeah, and we've got to treat it as a job, just like robbing banks is a job, just like scamming little old ladies out of their pension is a job. It's a job, and it's a job where it should be a criminal job, and it is. There is a victim and a perpetrator, and the aim of this is to make money. Yeah. And whilst ever these platforms exist, the wheels of commerce have to enable these platforms. Things like Facebook and YouTube and so forth are free to access because they generate some revenue somewhere. And what are the best ways to do this? Well, we know sex sells, it always has, and we can see this on platforms. Lots of creators are basically gateway into sites like OnlyFans. That's standard. That's difficult because that sort of content is generally banned on places like Facebook and pretty well policed. So you can only make it a gateway there. If you want to keep your revenue inside a platform, a good way to do it is things like Luxmaxing, because it's not banned.
Yeah.
The things you can, and it can't really be banned because, as you say, it's a fine line between a fitness influencer and a Luxmaxer. But as you go to these extremes, again, that flywheel operates, and the people at the extremes pick up the most viewers, therefore pick up the most revenue, and therefore various algorithms which are there to promote content and are there to monetize content push us to those extremes, push us to the more and more extreme, and it happens in pretty much, look at every single sort of fad or craze or new issue, and it has gone that way. It started small, it started probably pretty not very marketable, like by being an incel, but how can we turn this into something marketable, something that a great number of people can engage in? And that happens, and it will continue to happen. And I'm actually a little bit worried about the social media ban, because when we have a social media ban, we'll find other channels where this happens. Like, this is not going to make this go away because it's a business. It will thrive like a weed, and it will regrow, and it will come out of a crack somewhere where we don't expect it.
I'm going to come to you in a second to ask a little and dig a little bit more deeper about where. But I want to kind of double underline where you've come from there, Tom, and it's not the platform. And I really want to iterate that. It's not the platform.
They enable.
They're an enabler. It's the content and the decisions that are made by young people because of maybe the way that they perceive aspects of their life and other people's lives. That's where the key is. It's not just banning X or Instagram. It's actually talking to young people about how their behaviours impact themselves and others as well. And also being more aware about that exploitation commercially as well. Because, like you said, everything sells, sex sells, Luxmaxing sells, and someone behind all of this is trying to make money. So it's education at an early age.
And that's what is key, is that education to the young people. And that's, one of the key areas around RSE changes is you can't just sit still. You've got to continuously evolve your education, your curriculum, based on data that you've currently got, and being able to ensure that your staff know what they're talking about, that they can deliver those high quality lessons, and where those gaps are, those skills gaps within staff. That's why it's so important that, like section point 12 of Keeping Children Safe says, this shouldn't be something that you do as a one-hit wonder. It should be something that staff members get regular information, advice and guidance, newsletters, bulletins. They have to continue to evolve and develop this.
Where do schools go for that? Where does that practitioner go for it? Do they have it already there? Has the DFE provided it to them in a lovely toolkit, or are there other areas as well?
There are lots of toolkits available around those particular topics, and the RSE have got a number of resources at the back that are pointed to there. As we've had a lot of focus on these areas through media, there has been an awful lot of resources created around that as well that have been shared. Educate Against Hate, there's lots and lots of areas that have been generating resources around that.
That's really good to hear, and it's just such a positive that it's available.
Absolutely.
I think most probably the quagmire of it is that a practitioner might not know what to pull and when to pull. So there might be a little bit of time while they get themselves aligned with the new amendments and changes that they're bringing these pieces in.
Yeah.
And again, it's going to take time, I guess.
I would think, because this isn't something that's happened overnight. This is something that we've had evolving over the last 4, 5, 6 years, with everything that's gone on with Plymouth and the rise of kind of the incel culture and that kind of area. I don't think this is something that schools are going to have to immediately find resources for. I think this is something that they've already got a set of tools. I think they just need to evolve those tools based on what's currently happening in the digital environment as well, and being very aware of that, especially as we talk, and the guidance very much looks at things like online influencers. They need to have that awareness as to what is being pushed, what are the places that this is happening.
Yeah. And so far, it's been comforting to hear that we're talking about kits and we're talking about resources and upskilling, and we're talking about evolving. We're talking about constantly moving forward, because I think if we were just here and saying, right, we've got everything we need, which we've already covered, we'd be in a really dangerous place in 12 months' time. But to say schools are actually given the tools, we're providing support, there are agencies out there, there are organisations, there are interventions and behavioural analysts that can support them. it's a really positive step forward into keeping that young person safe and everything around them as well, which is really good to hear. I'm going to go on to the DSLs now, and we talked about I call them the workforce. They're far greater than that. Those DSLs that are in schools and MATs, their role has, again, and I'll use that word, evolved over the last 5-6 years. How much impact is being put on those DSLs now, especially with the changes to keeping children safe? What's required of them post September? Are there any key kind of indicators of greater workload or more responsibility?
I think the key for DSLs is that, yes, there are, and they already are very much aware that safeguarding never sits still. So they know they need to upskill. That's never been an issue. The areas that have been added into keeping children safe are more towards cover and what happens when the designated safeguarding lead isn't in school for whatever reason, trip, sick, whatever, because safeguarding should never sit still. We shouldn't have the position where the designated safeguarding lead is off for a week because they've broken an arm, therefore these cases aren't progressed. So that's one of the key areas that has been addressed, is schools need to ensure that there is a significant thought put into what happens when that designated safeguarding lead is not there, and how do they handle cases, how do they ensure that continuity of safeguarding across their setting. But also around designated safeguarding leads and the skills that those designated safeguarding leads have. Do they have the experience? Are they given time? Are they given, the opportunity to grow as a designated safeguarding lead? Have they been a DDSL, before they've been a DSL, to be able to build that knowledge set? Are they given the time to be able to do their job effectively? Because we know that in some schools they may have multiple hats that they're wearing, and we know that safeguarding is only getting more of a responsibility for those people that take on those roles within schools.
Definitely. From a network perspective or an IT manager's perspective, do you think there's been more or less burden put on them as a facilitator to data and information, or has it become more leaning towards the DSL? Or do you think that with KCSIE and the other guidance that's in place, there's a balance that's trying to be given?
I think there's a really positive trajectory for folks in IT in schools, in terms of the way they work together with other stakeholders today. Back in the day, it was very much, and I'm sure in some schools it still is, and if you're listening, I'm sorry for that. That the IT folks are, if it's got a plug on it, it's your fault, regardless. Toaster's burning the toast, it's IT's fault. That certainly was the way for many, many years. I would hope that many folks working in school IT are now quite relieved to have some people on side. Back in the day of filter alerting and all those kind of, when it was pretty rough and ready, alerts generally went to IT teams. And IT teams, they weren't equipped to deal with those sorts of things back then, when the world was a simpler place and this was all fields. Things have moved on. Things are a lot harder to deal with, and we know the spare time and money fairy has been on holiday for many, many years now, and there's no magic wands being waved to sort of grant us extra resource and extra time and extra budget to do new things. But I think IT folks will be relieved that it's not just their problem anymore. It's seen as a whole school problem. It's seen as something that SLT needs to address. And again, not to bang on about it, but seen to address it as a team sport rather than just, this is something that happens through a laptop or a tablet, and therefore IT are the only people who can help deal with this, because it never has been the case, but at least that's being recognised. And again, the UK is a world leader in the way we legislate this, the guidance that comes out. We know we aren't as far on as we'd all love to be, but it's, we're doing better than a great many people, and I'm really glad to see that collegiate atmosphere starting to come in schools and trusts around the country.
We've definitely seen that as individuals that go out to schools and that. We've definitely seen more collaboration work, not just because of the guidance telling, but because of the need internally to share that. Gabi, from your perspective as being able to support DSLs and network managers and teams around that, how do you feel that the pressure and the capacity that DSLs have for and I'm talking specifically around digital concerns around safeguarding. How do you feel that the areas of what we do in Smoothwall has alleviated or has given them extra burden? I hope it's not the latter. But how do you feel that they take that information now that maybe they did a couple of years ago? What do they find that? How do they find that?
Yeah, so we've definitely seen an evolution in how schools expect to get that data. When monitoring first got started, pretty much everything got sent to the school. So everything that might be captured was sent effectively raw to the school. Over the years, we've refined that to the point where, for us, as an example, we take about 1.8 billion raw captures a month. Our moderators review about 260 million, something like that. But we produce about 300,000 alerts. So we're dramatically reducing the volume before it goes to a school. And that's all false positives, things they don't need to see. The easiest example is things like when they're doing biology education, lots of reproductive terms. We still need to capture those because we need to make sure that they're not viewing sexual content, but we don't need to waste a DSL's time by sending them over as an alert. So being able to save them that time, send them things that do genuinely represent risk, means that their time is spent on real digital risks, real events, not on sifting through everything a laptop might think represents a concern. And for us, that means that when we do have to phone, when we do have to have a conversation because there's a really urgent, life-threatening alert, they can take us seriously because they understand that we spend all of our time sifting and sorting for them and ensuring that their time is preserved.
Yeah, and digital safeguarding is just that one jigsaw piece, isn't it, in the picture? But being able to present that in the way that they need it, the timely manner that they need it, and in the purpose that they need it for, can reduce a lot of the burden and constraints that previously, a few years ago, without having the safeguarding solutions that are in place, would have meant that they'd have had to go through them looking for that needle in the haystack, which would have been more and more of a burden with everything that's being built on. And I hope that lots of schools understand that and know how to work efficiently with that information and build it into their other MIS safeguarding systems and what have you, so that they can present the bigger picture quicker, so they can go and deal with what they need to do to make sure people are safe when they're...
It's an interesting point Gabi makes about, the kind of old world of folks going through these huge swathes of alerts. The people who did that were almost exclusively IT. Again, this speaks to the evolution and the changes that we're seeing. But I was chatting to someone only a week or so ago who was chatting to me on his day off because he's in a situation in which, like, days off are a bit of a movable feast. He's always got too much to do, and he knows who he is. He's chatting to me in the car on his way home. But about this, he does a great job of taking the alerts from a fire hose type monitoring product that, every time someone types the letters SEX, will fire in an alert. And he knows the kids and he knows the lessons and he knows, but he's spending a lot of time building his reports. I do hope the DSLs in that school know how absolutely phenomenally lucky they are to have somebody like that working to turn what is, by his own admission, 99% mud, 99.9% mud and 0.01% of gold into just gold for those. But IT can't afford generally to spend that amount of time. It's not really their remit, nor is it necessarily their expertise. But some of the old ways still persist. And I worry for schools when they join MATs, or there are changes in the IT team, or something gets insourced or outsourced or moved about, and these people who were doing that job suddenly have no time to do that job anymore. Because let's face it, we're talking here about safeguarding. IT have 101 other things to be thinking about as well as safeguarding. When that falls by the wayside, where does it go? So what we need, and I'm going to use this horrible techie buzzword here, but scalable is the key word. What we need in schools is something that's scalable and repeatable. And as we see schools joining MATs and schools getting, being part of a bigger organisation, this speaks to what Kat was talking about. How do we manage when one person is off? How does this process continue? How does the culture of safety mean that we can catch people when they fall, despite the fact that someone's off ill or on a trip or whatever have you? How do we make sure that when, and I'm sure Gabi, you can speak a bit to this, we see much more in the way of alerting coming in because people are using AI to generate sexualized content or whatever have you. If that doubles, and it doubles your workload, how do you manage that? So, there's making things scalable, reliable, and repeatable is incredibly important. I know mattification has not been all beer and skittles, but I think that's one place where it can really help, particularly with, smaller primaries who can't afford to have necessarily loads of cover or lots of different experts in there. That's where this can really work.
Yeah, definitely. Where the governing bodies sit on all of this in terms of their accountability, responsibility, their QA of all of this. What's their role within a school? And from September onwards, what are they going to be encouraged to do more?
So they need to be challenging everything that's going on within their establishment. We know a number of us are governors that work here at Smoothwall, and that challenge that goes on is so vitally important. But they can only go to challenge things if they come from a position of knowledge. And that's where that developing of your governing body, ensuring they do have the knowledge and skills around everything that we're talking about today, the whole of keeping children safe in education. They understand all the changes, they understand what filtering and monitoring they've got in place, they understand all of these areas that we're talking about, how this works with students, how are they embedding it into curriculum, are they confident the staff have got the skills to be able to navigate it? All of these are questions that they need to be asking.
But I think over the years, what we've seen is the governing body becoming more responsible than ever, rather than it being a group that get together for committees and nod and tick off boxes for new policies. Their accountability has become greater, which is so important because it needs to be from the top down, and everyone needs to have that level of understanding. So the KCSIE guidance this year reaffirms that, and it makes sure that governing bodies are supporting the application of education and training and awareness of what's going on. And that's from a physical and the digital aspect as well. And I feel that from my conversations with governing bodies over the last 12 months, 24 months, that they're the most removed when it comes to the digital side. They will always be concerned about that young person that's being bullied in the playground, but won't understand what it means if someone's been isolated with a deep fake that has gone viral within a school. And it's about them understanding that knowledge at their level and at SLT and at MAT level as well, and then being dripped through to everyone in that establishment having that understanding so they know the impact of it. I sat in on an online webinar from the IWF's launch of their new report, and there was a girl who was 21 now, I think, telling her story, and it's well worth finding out if we'll drop the link at the end of this. But what it happened was through the ages of 12 to 14, she was groomed by someone that was in year 12, 13. And she shared explicit pictures and it went viral. And unfortunately, the school challenged her for her to be the concern and for her to actually be the instrument of safeguarding concern rather than the other way around. And I think sometimes that's lacking of the knowledge. And that's a real big gap that is being shortened with things like keeping children safe and the additions to it this year. But we still need to keep striving towards that because we need to make sure that everyone is safe when they're...
Well, victim blaming is not a new thing. But we remember never attribute to malice something which can be adequately explained by ignorance. And that's usually the explanation for this. It's we didn't know what was happening.
Yeah.
So we blamed the person it was happening to, and that's so common. But I do think, as Kat was saying there's more out there for people to learn about these things. Often it's really hard to find. I was working with a head teacher a few months ago who was dealing with an instance of misogyny and violence against women, and he found it really hard. He turned to LLMs to help him build worksheets. He found it hard to pull together that information. So the more that we can make sure we reach a hand out to people who might be needing it, don't assume that everybody's got everything they need. There'll be people who are struggling to understand and battling through, and make sure if you've got some help that you can give them, reach out, because it's a challenging time.
This year's changes, and through its consultation as well, has been very heavily leaning towards mental health and early indication, which is a welcome for us. And I know that it's now that it's in the document, that's great, but we've all been working towards that anyway. But what in terms, and I'll come to you, Gabi, on this one about what you're seeing from the detection point. In terms of mental health, are there any specific areas that you're finding? And that's a really big question to ask, I know. But in terms of the trends that are occurring with young people, and I just want to put out there as well, this is at primary, secondary, and FAE level.
Yeah.
So if there are any changes, if you can elaborate on that as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really seeing 3 key trends. The first one is young people relying on LLMs, on AI chatbots for some kind of therapeutic or relationship support. Young people who are vulnerable, who feel isolated, don't necessarily yet have the brain development to really understand that this isn't a person. Some of the recent reporting particularly says that young people with SEND were much more heavily reliant on AI chatbots for friendship, for support. And we're seeing that not only do they go very far down the pathway of engaging with and confiding in this chatbot, but they also then often react very badly when they do disclose thoughts of self-harm or suicide or poor mental health, and that chatbot responds with what we call a redirection. So it says, I can't help with that, here's a support line. Now that's absolutely, it's a safety response, and they absolutely should be redirected to appropriate support. But for a young person, that's incredibly jarring. It's their friend suddenly becoming a robot again. It's their trusted support network becoming unavailable. So we need to ensure that we are there for them and that they can have that conversation with us as schools, as their friends, their family and their network, because at that point, suddenly they've lost their point of safety. The other thing that we're seeing very critically is that young people, when they go into crisis, they don't tend to go into crisis at a convenient time for schools, right? Children don't tend to hit a crisis at like 2:30 p.m. sat in the school office with the DSL next to them. It's often 2 or 3 a.m. It's very late in the day. And what we are seeing is things like them writing out a plea for help, writing out a request for help, writing out their feelings, but then deleting it, not sending it. So it's really critical that their devices are appropriately monitored off-site and that they have the things that mean that if they do write that in a protected environment, we catch it whether or not they send it, because them writing it out but deleting it could be the last action they take, and if we can get to them on time. And that 24/7 monitored service is really critical for us being there when they need us most, whenever it happens, whenever they go into crisis.
Is that sector specific? So you've seen that in a particular area of primary, secondary or FE, or is it across the board?
For us, specifically around secondary, what we tend to see with FE is that young people have more context. They more understand that they have survived 100% of their worst days, that the friends that they had at primary or secondary who weren't supportive, who weren't kind to them, have kind of disappeared into the ether, and they've started to continue to thrive. And I think particularly FE colleges are real experts at creating a sense of belonging, a sense of community, enabling students who maybe have never thrived academically before to find their niche. So what we tend to find is there's a bit more resilience. The alternative of that is that FE colleges serve more vulnerable students than anywhere else. They take more students from PRUs, from AP. They'll take in refugees, people who have been in industry for a long time, maybe not been academic study for decades, whose industry has changed or collapsed and have to go back. So for them, they're seeing students with a different context, and they need to be more able to flex their approach for that real diversity of learners. Whereas for secondary, our biggest risk is that the time between a negative thought and something like a suicide attempt or serious self-harm is very contracted. Those students move very quickly. They act on instinct still. So we need to be able to act quickly. And then I think in terms of the last trend, it is things that inspire suicide externally. So we've known for a long time, for example, things like gambling addiction, gaming, getting involved in things where a student suddenly is in over their head are very high risk for suicide. What we're seeing now is things like that absolute industrial mechanism behind what's called sextortion, sexually coerced extortion, where students are convinced to share an intimate picture of themselves or share intimate details. That's then used to blackmail them. Again, that's a really high suicide risk. It's often young men, they're often very vulnerable. Often there are questions about their sexuality or their identity tangled up in that. And we really need to make sure that we take away the shame, that we have conversations about image sharing, about sexuality, that make them feel like they can ask for help. I think, as Tom said earlier about the social media ban, that really concerns me, because if we do see students sneaking online before they're allowed, creating accounts that they're not yet allowed to have, and then getting into this kind of situation, the biggest risk is that they don't feel like they can ask for help. They don't feel like they can admit that they've gotten into trouble. So we really need pathways where students feel like they can come for help, they can disclose something, they can talk to somebody, and that all of our staff are really trained on handling that without shame, without showing too much emotion, without making them feel bad, and that we don't promise to keep secrets, that we're really honest with them about the fact that they're disclosing things and we can help, but that we won't keep that as a secret. We'll ask for the appropriate help, we'll source the support that they need so that these protective communities can really act to support them.
And can I just put in a plug there? I just want to put on my IWF trustee hat and plug Report Remove.
Absolutely.
Which is the service which young people can use if there are images of themselves that have been shared that would constitute child sexual abuse images, because they're images of young people, even if they're consensual, they constitute child sexual abuse images. They can be uploaded to Report Remove, and when they're uploaded to Report Remove, they'll be assessed by the IWF, and they'll be generated a hash of those, and the hash is a fingerprint. You can't go from that fingerprint back to the original image, in the same way as if you mix green and yellow paint, make something horrible brownie colour, you can't take the paint back out of that, so you can't turn it back into the original image. What they will then use that fingerprint for is it'll be passed to Facebook, it'll be passed to Pornhub, it'll be passed to OnlyFans. That image cannot then be uploaded to those because they'll check against that fingerprint and that cannot be uploaded. So it's not perfect, you can't delete the image from the internet, but the major platforms will immediately start rejecting that. So the case that something cannot be done is not the case. Something can be done.
Yeah.
So don't feel helpless. Please advertise this. There are relatively few reports through to Report Remove at the moment. I was in there with the IWF's hotline folks the other day. They're seeing an increase, but we know the problem is large and the instance of people trying to solve the problem is small. So Report Remove, and if you're not a young person and you have had your intimate images shared, the Revenge Porn Helpline, run by our friends at Southwest Print for Learning / UK Safer Internet Centre, is there for a very, very similar service. So those are two things that too few people know about, and it's a sort of thing that knowing about it in the moment could be the difference between life and death for somebody.
Definitely. Kat, from your experience, are schools educated around these areas? Are they using it? Are they using what Tom's just been
by
talking
Kat, yes.
I would say they are very much aware of some of the resources, and I say some of the resources that are available to them. We know that Keeping Children Safe in Education is a very, very lengthy document with lots of amazing resources that are added in there. I think it's about re-highlighting those, and again, that's where that regularity comes in. I think they are very much aware of them, but how we re-highlight those is very important, and re-highlight those to staff members as well. And it comes back to that whole thing that Gabi was talking about, which is a culture.
Yeah.
It's a culture of how people safeguard. It's a culture of how we translate what has been said and how we approach when a young person says that they're having concerns or they're not happy about something. How do we address that? How do we respond? How do we behave? All of those things are so vitally important, but also how schools facilitate children reaching out for help is so vitally important. I know some schools who will do things like have pastoral pop-in sessions. They'll have tools that the child can digitally reach out for help and support for. Being able to have the variety, because we know that some children will much rather prefer digital means than physically walking up to Tom, for example, and saying, I need to report a safeguarding concern, because that's the nature of some of how our children facilitate that ability to communicate is more digitally. So they need to think about that variety.
Some of that might be, in a way, selection bias, because those schools that you go into, of course, have chosen to work with you on these things, so they're probably a little further on than some others. What would you say to folks who are listening to this and shaking a little bit, thinking, well, I'm not sure I'm halfway there. As an IT person, I don't work very closely with DSL or vice versa. Where would you start? Where would you start to help with that?
So there's a few different places. First is we have so many amazing resources that our team puts out via our social media platforms, that we have loads of resources that we have on our websites, but we also have so many resources that are embedded into keeping children safe and education as well. So I would always have a look at the resources that are embedded in there from the DFE, because those resources are usually high quality, very, very good resources that schools can definitely use. We are always here at Smoothwall to help and support all kind of customers that we have, but also any non-customers. So they're very, very happy to kind of reach out for us for the help and support, because we're very much integrated into various places, such as yourself, Tom, who work with many, many amazing stakeholders, and we do share and champion an awful lot of these resources out to schools. So we're always here to help as well.
So Kat, just to kind of put it into perspective, at what ages do you think that schools and parents, especially parents as well, need to be talking to their young person or their young people about the dangers that are online and how they can report this information?
Yeah, so we should be, all parents should be talking to their children as soon as they're being given technology, as soon as they're experiencing it, because we know from places like the Ofcom Media Usage Report that we have high proportions of devices being given to young people. We know that already about a third of between 3 to 5 year olds are already on social media platforms, obviously, even though the age rating is currently set at 13. So what we need to do is to make sure that we are, as soon as we're, talking, as soon as we're giving those devices, thinking about how we're using them as parents, how we're supporting our child to have those conversations with the parent about those particular risks and harms, and what to do if something doesn't work in the way that they expect it to be able to speak to the parent, but also that they're having those conversations in the educational settings in the nurseries, because we know that they're also using technologies in nurseries and then moving into primary schools.
So not 11 to 12-year-olds then?
We need to do it very, very early.
We're talking 3 to 4-year-olds.
We're talking from the minute they get that technology.
And Gabi, are there any other resources? We've touched upon some that individuals can be signposted to. Are there any other resources that are out there that are really valuable in terms of being aware of, not just for schools, but for parents and for young people as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So one I'd like to point everyone to is the Lucy Faithfull Foundation have the Shore helpline. That is specifically focused around young people who are accessing or exposed to child sexual abuse material. So whether they are trying to find it, whether they have been found to be creating it by the school, they can talk to families, they can talk to educators as well as the young person themselves. But we know from things like the Ofcom report that early exposure to CSAM is a real correlating factor in later perpetrator behaviour. So we want to protect these young people as soon as possible, get them to expert help and interrupt that pipeline, make sure that we can get them back into a place where they are behaving with the safety and dignity of themselves and their peers around them first and forefront in their minds.
That's really important, because it's the two sides of the coin then, isn't it? Rather than always looking at that one side of the reactive side, it's also looking at the more proactive side of what to do if I am that person and where can I go? Because sometimes those channels are much smaller. Certainly to identify. So it's great to see that the Lucy Faithfull Foundation have got that and it's available.
Yeah, and I always say when I'm doing my sessions, it's better that you know about these things and never need them than need them and don't know about them.
The attitude of it won't happen here is
absolutely
sadly somewhat prevalent, and the fact is it probably won't this year, but
when you need it, you need
eventually
it.
Sometimes the serious incident, it's your school's turn, and as you say, better to be ready and prepared for these things.
I think that brings me nicely to that digital safeguarding fence that we have around the school and coming to filtering and monitoring. And I'm looking at you, Tom, but I will look at everyone else, I promise as well. It's so important that we understand what filtering and monitoring is. And I think schools would be quite honest and say not everyone in the school knows the difference between filtering and monitoring. And they are working towards that. September is another great touch point there for them to get all of their school staff together, staff and non-staff, to understand what that is. But why is it essential to have filtering and monitoring? And I say that with a wry smile on my face, because I know the answer, but there are many out there that might not.
Well, you'd be surprised, wouldn't you? Even many years ago, some policymakers were a little confused at the difference between filtering and monitoring. And the way I usually put it is, filtering is like that fence around the playground. Filtering is to stop young people getting to things that we know are bad. And that's great. It works for where other people are publishing things that we know are unpleasant. We can stop people in the main getting to those resources. However, not all bad things happen in bad places. In fact, probably the majority of harms happen in places we would consider to be perfectly acceptable in a school. So, for example, if your school uses Google Docs or Microsoft Office 365, there's no way you can block Google Docs or Microsoft Office 365. You're going to need that for working. But young people can bully each other within those environments. As Gabi was saying earlier, someone might be writing a cry for help in a Google Doc. So it's not that monitoring is there to necessarily make a better job of spotting people going onto illicit content, because your filter should have that pretty well nailed down. What monitoring is there for is to look at what's happening inside the playground, inside the place which you believe safe. So consider monitor your member of staff in the digital playground looking out to see the behaviours of young people rather than just where they're actually attempting to go to exhibit those behaviours.
So with filtering, what constitutes appropriate in today's world from September the 1st?
It's at the door. Sorry, I've got to go.
Easy question, difficult answer. But if you're a DSL or you're an IT network manager on the 1st of September, you've come in, the changes are here. What constitutes appropriate filtering? And I'll come to you in a minute with monitoring, so don't worry.
Oh, she's not getting away with this, is she? Appropriate is a very, very loaded term. So unfortunately, it's always going to come down to it depends. You do have to take your school context into account, the devices you're using, the young people who are using them, their levels of exposure, what they're going to be doing on that, their age, their everything about them. You've got to take into account when you're talking about both filtering and monitoring. After that, what looks like appropriate filtering? Well, consider it as a risk register, and I'm sure you're familiar with doing risk registers for other things. If you're doing a school trip, you're going to look at the health and safety. You're going to be walking by the side of the canal. You're going to think about what would happen if a young person falls in. All of this is about what are the risks that I'm going to be engaging with online, and how am I going to mitigate those? So we're going to allow young people access to a search engine. They're going to search for stuff. Is it sensible then to have a filter that can't see search terms? Probably not. That's a fairly trivial example, but you'd be surprised at the number of schools who are still using a filter that can't see the search terms that young people type into Google. And for me, that is something where there's a gap in safety. So you've got to look holistically at the capabilities of a filter. What can it see, and what can it make those decisions about blocking, allowing them? So can it see something like a search term? Can it see deeper into a website's URL? What does it make a decision? Does it look at the content that might be coming from that site? And content is an increasingly difficult concept to think about, because we've gone from an era of user-generated content, so the sort of YouTube Web 2.0 era, where a lot of content was generated by users, very rapidly generated, huge amounts of content to be consumed, to now the AI era, where content is generated by an AI. And the downside of content that's generated from AI, from a safeguarding point of view, is it's likely to be generated on the fly exclusively for that user. So you've got some ephemeral content there. We don't know that these sites are generating content with AI. We go on Spotify, for example, and you can click through from some music that was generated by a bona fide musician who may not be able to tune their guitar, but they could still actually generate music, and it was still a person behind that. The next song you click on might be entirely generated by a computer. And it's quite possible that no one has ever listened to that before or will ever listen to that again. And it's content generated for precisely one person, generated to their tastes, to their queries, to what they've been doing just recently. So understanding the content that is coming down to your young people's devices is super important. So working with a filter that can maybe look at that sort of thing, something that has risen in importance. Of late, you've seen the Department for Education recently have made a kind of statement on what real-time content filtering actually is, in order that there's less confusion, where some people would say this is real-time and some people say this isn't. Real-time isn't about, like, am I going to catch this in time? It's, am I going to catch this at all? Because this was generated in the moment for a young person, or this was behind a a login. This is on a forum behind a login that nobody else can see except for that young person because they've got a login and you don't. So that's, for me, in terms of appropriateness, you've got to be thinking about all these levels. What's the filter able to see? What's it able to make a decision on? Because it's going to be making more and more nuanced decisions on your behalf. So you've got to make sure it's got all that information available to it and it's making those decisions well. Furthermore, the least appropriate filter is the one that isn't working. Right? Make sure your filter is working. And you're looking at me and you're going, Tom, what? There's filters out there that aren't working. There's devices that are bought perhaps not by IT, shadow IT that ends up in the school. There's devices that are change configuration. It's a particularly good one over summer. Yeah. Configurations change, something gets missed, and all of a sudden something's not filtered. This is never, never, never down to maliciousness. It's always down to somebody's made a mistake and something's not filtered.
So one takeaway would be DSL, IT network lead, 1st of September or 3rd of September, get together. What's our visibility looking like on our devices?
Yeah, and even more than that, all staff around schools should consider, is this device actually being filtered correctly? One great resource there is testfiltering.com. So, back in the day, if you just installed a filter and you were feeling a bit dangerous and you put playboy.com in and you hope it's going to work, don't do that. It's terrible advice. Testfiltering.com, completely safe to use. It's anonymous unless you put your school name in. And it's run by the UK Safer Internet Centre. Staff should be using that just to double check. That'll tell you whether the filter's even there at all. It might not be. So,
great.
The least appropriate filter is one that doesn't exist, but there's a load of gradation above that.
Thank you for putting that in one small nutshell for us there. If you want to find out more, go on to one of Tom's talks and he'll be able to explore it in minute detail. But it's a really good overview, and it's so relevant for a layperson who doesn't have technical experience, understanding that you've got the fence. What it's doing is it's letting the good stuff in, it's stopping the bad stuff, but you've got to keep on challenging that as well and moving with the times. Otherwise it becomes something that is redundant, essentially. From a monitoring perspective, Gabi, what do you think constitutes appropriate monitoring?
So we have seen for a long time a suggestion that you could just physically monitor devices. You could stand in a classroom and have an eye on what's happening. And from the extent, the sheer scope of what we see, we know that that just is not appropriate, particularly for a busy school, for a well-equipped classroom, but also for devices that go home. If you lose sight of those devices, they can be accessing all sorts of things. And the last thing you want as a DSL is to know that your school devices are out there and they're being used to get to explicit content, extremist content, being used for bullying, that you're missing crises because your device is not properly monitored. Anytime that device is in use, you should be able to know that child is protected, that you can be aware if they encounter risk or they become a risk to others. The other thing that we are really starting to see is an understanding that those alerts should be timely and that they should be in some way prioritised or managed so that the DSL can choose where they use their limited time. We know all our DSLs are extremely time poor, they're very busy. You should not be having to wade through a load of noise to get to where you're most needed. And ideally, you should be able to categorise. So you really want to be able to say, actually, our behaviour alerts primarily go to somebody who isn't DSL. They might be triaged back to me because they represent a specific safeguarding concern, but I really don't want to be the first person who touches those. Similarly, your prevent staff should be able to see anything around extremism, radicalisation really quickly. They shouldn't have to wait for the DSL to triage that. They should be able to get to that alert directly and ensure that they're alerted appropriately. And then I think the last thing that's really key that we're seeing much more emphasis on now, and is going to be a change of practice for some of our schools, particularly primaries, is that the device should be authenticated. You should, from your monitoring, be able to know which user generated that alert. The day of grab and go devices is really over, because the risks that children can be exposed to on those devices and the ability to get to that child in need and identify who created that alert is so pressing. You simply cannot have something like a suicide alert or a child generating illegal imagery and not know which of a class of 30 that happened to. And those children will be aware that something wrong happened and they will not want to own up to it. You have to be able to track down that behaviour to that child and that device. So it's really important that you understand how the devices are authenticated, how the children children log in, how they access the internet and get to the things that they're using.
Yeah,
And when you talk, Gabi, when you talk about timeliness and sifting through a huge amount of things, when you've spoken to people using those sort of systems, does that tend to become an end of week job rather than a every morning job, and then does maybe that tend to become an end of month job sometimes?
Yeah, we absolutely see with what we call fire hose monitoring, so where you get all the noise generated with no level of sifting, that it becomes something that has to be time blocked. You have to have a morning a week or a day a week, or you get somebody who is relatively junior who does that original sifting, and that means they are not best equipped to understand the nuance, the kind of things that they're seeing. You're effectively using somebody to moderate that content for you who just doesn't have the level of expertise that you need. There is no version, I think, of fire hose monitoring that in the scale of digital access children have now means that alert is appropriately directed and delivered in a way that is urgent enough for us to protect those children.
And it would be remiss of us not to mention the UK Safer Internet Centre again and their definitions of appropriate filtering and monitoring, which they are in constant communication with both schools and vendors about what appropriate looks like. I know there's some more changes coming through. I'm sure they won't mind me mentioning that they're changing those. What I would say is take those definitions, look at the answers that your vendors have given, and go and ask them about it. Because the answers tend to be half a paragraph, and the answers can hide a multitude of things behind them. Go talk to the people who've written those and say, what does this mean for me? Because those answers may change dependent on the scenarios within your school.
And I think what the guidance is stressing as well, and I'll come to you in a second to talk about reviewing this, the guidance itself is stressing is that it's not a lone person's role to do this. It's a collaborative piece of work. So get that information from the UK Safer Internet Centre, work, network and DSL, pastoral team, and go through those questions. And that's where you can challenge, that's where you can accept, and that's where you can feel confident that you're moving forward post-September using the right guidance and the right type of support mechanisms in place. Thanks. Just going on to the other side of that, what might a review look like for filtering and monitoring? Who's in charge of that? What do they do? And what takes them to the next step rather than just the tick and forget attitude? What actually is the meaningful side of KCSIE that then can be put into practice in schools?
So the changes as well focus around that annual review, which we've already had in there for a number of years, but what this focuses is doing it at least once every academic year on all connected internet-enabled devices, making sure that that is very, very clear. So I think schools need to very much go back to the drawing board in terms of what Tom was talking about, in terms of what they have in place, whether it meets their needs, whether they have done that customizability that Tom has very clearly laid out with different year groups, different curriculum areas, not overblocking, going through and actually challenging what they've actually got in place, checking that they've integrated what they have from a monitoring perspective to give them that very clear line of sight into things like CPOMs or My Concern, to be able to action things very quickly. All of those kind of elements, but looking very robustly at the tools that they have and whether they are fit for purpose, looking at what those definitions are in terms of appropriate monitoring that have been laid out, and really challenging. And it comes back to what we were talking about with regards to governance, you know, being able to challenge what is going on within those school environments, but doing it from a position of knowledge. And that comes back to making sure that the people who are doing that challenge have that knowledge and skills around the difference between filtering and monitoring, which is what it all boils down to, and understanding that safeguarding implication.
I might be a little bit on the negative side here as to how we're doing at the moment in terms of what the baseline looks like at the moment. But I think if someone were to come into your school or trust and say, tell me about the last time you reviewed your filtering and monitoring provision, and you were able to point them at the minutes of a meeting that included teaching, IT, and safeguarding, and just the questions, what went well this year in filtering and monitoring, and what went poorly this year in filtering and monitoring, and what do we intend to do about it, you will be way over and above the vast majority of folks, because the vast majority of folks, it's just a case of on a day-to-day, this was blocked and it shouldn't have been, let's get that fixed. This was allowed and it shouldn't have been, let's get that fixed. We saw an uptick in alerts here. how did we manage that in the moment? And it's useful to reflect. It's nice for us to be able to sit here and reflect on a year's changes in KCSIE in the same way as it's useful for folks in schools to have that reflection and have a little bit of a holistic reflection where we're seeing input from teaching and learning, where you might have discoveries that your filter is perhaps blocking a little too much, or perhaps impeding what they are trying to do, particularly as teachers may be trying to use AI tools. Input from safeguarding, where we say, well, we've seen a lot of alerts at this time, or these type of alerts. What could that mean from a more whole school approach? Just having an hour or so working that through once a year is probably going to up most people's levels in a great way. So make a start on it. Don't be afraid to say, well, they've asked us for this. It's huge. It's a big imposition. Make a start, and I promise you it will lead to improvements almost immediately.
And I think you've got that, hit the nail on the head there, not to spend too much time on it, but to do it more regularly. So rather than becoming a burden or that piece of work that you're always putting to the side because you know it's going to take a task to do it in those little bits in collaboration and break it down so a committee in the governance team can have that information, an Ofsted inspector can have that information, and it's there and it's relevant. And I think that will just alleviate a lot of the concerns that a lot of DSLs and network managers have when that phone rings on a Monday morning, or I think it's a Monday morning anyway. It is a Monday, isn't it? Yeah, we've had it recently. What this whole conversation is about is what KCSIE's bringing on in September, where schools and MATs and colleges are from primary to secondary through to FE. But what we're here to do is to reassure. It's about reassurance, to make sure that schools know that they've got somewhere to go, that they've got the tools available to them, that they have the systems in place. As one takeaway from each of you, as our in-house experts, and I'll get one from each of you on a specific area. Have a think about what can an individual watching this take away now? So, Tom, from your perspective, from a network manager's perspective, what can they take away from this conversation? What can they go and do proactively?
I think two things. Number one, you're not alone. You've got support. It's no longer just the network manager's role, which it shouldn't have been to begin with, but KCSIE now makes this abundantly clear. So very occasionally, you need to get out there and sit in those meetings. You need to be working with the highest levels in your organisation to make sure that the support is there for everybody and it's bi-directional. So that's thing A. Thing B is challenge yourself. AI particularly is going to make things a lot more difficult because you're going to be asked to allow the use of a lot of different tools, or tools with very complex safety profiles, and that's going to be a challenge. On the other hand, AI is going to be good for you in terms of increasing your capability. And I know you've probably not got a ton of time. Go out and see where it might save you time, but go out and be the person who looks at that new technology and looks at both sides of the coin, looks at the positives and the negatives. Go out and embrace it, because we keep our friends close, but our enemies closer. So that's what I need you to do with AI.
Kat, from your perspective, have you got any tips for people watching?
Yeah, definitely reviewing all of the policies and practice that we currently have in place in our school based on the new Keeping Children Safe in Education, looking at exactly what are your current provisions, what have you, again, when it comes to staff training for governors, for parents, for students, reviewing that whole piece around that whole school strategy around digital safeguarding, and, as I say, ensuring that your policies are fit for purpose, do what they need to do, and that you can use your policies as a go-to if something does happen.
Do we have any guidance on that?
We have lots and lots of materials around policies that we share through, again, the website, but also through the training that we deliver as well.
Excellent. And Gabi, from a monitoring perspective or early intervention and detection?
Review what you saw this year. go through what you saw, have a review of anything you think you didn't see, anything that you think represents a missed opportunity, some point where there was a weakness in your system, in deployment, in device monitoring, anything where you're just not sure that safety net's in place, and really question it now, dive into the details, make sure that you're comfortable that you have a strategic partner on your side for that monitoring. Monitoring should give you eyes where you can't be. So if it doesn't give you that confidence, if it doesn't feel like it's a backup to you, now is the time to enact something different. And I would also say, speak to your community. Find out what other people have in place, how they handle that, how they manage those alerts. Don't try and handle everything alone. There will be a lot of DSLs facing down what they were hoping for to be their summer break and wondering how on earth they tackle everything that they need to adapt to. And the best thing you can do is talk to your community, find out who else is an expert, and really make sure that you've got all of those resources to hand so that you can also take some summer break, you can put your own oxygen mask on, and you can come back in September ready and prepared for the new regulations without feeling like you spent all summer doing all of the groundwork for those.
Fantastic. And from myself, I think it's all about meaningful impact. Ticking the box is great. 1st of September, we've all ticked the box. It's that continuation of improvement. It's a continuation of what each of you have spoken. And I'd like to thank you. We've barely scratched the surface on what KCSIE is going to be bringing in September and the wider remit around areas like AI, talking about misogyny, looking at how we can actually educate and support and create awareness and generate awareness. So thank you, Tom, thank you, Gabi, and thank you, Kat, for your time. We've got a whole host of information on our website. If you'd like to chat with any of our experts, or if you've got any queries following watching this, if you just want to email us at inquiries@smoothwall.com, we'll gladly get back to you. But thank you very much, everyone. Really enjoyed it, and enjoy the rest of your day.